So I've made quite good progress. I've come down the side of this 8mm bead and I've made a curve inwards, but I haven't put a bead in this one. I thought I'd leave that until the next row comes along and then that can insert a bead into that gap. So we'll have 3 parallel rows of seed beads framing perhaps something like that. But that is for the next row. I've come up around this large bead and I've inserted a small seed bead in there, a small bead anyway. It's a size 6 seed bead, so I've made quite a tight little turn there. So that was decrease, 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 3 decrease stitches in a row to make the curve, the inside curve, so I can get that size 6 seed bead in. I've come over the top of there, made another curve upwards and inserted a new bead, and now I'm coming over the top here. Now up until this point the grey line has been going across the top of all of my first row beads. I now want to swap it to going below that first row of beads. So this mustard row needs to now come over the top of this bead. There's nothing to square stitch to, so I'm going to have to put a strap across the top and then continue along here. Now it's quite a tight corner here, so if I arrange it just right, you can see I've just come off this curve here. I think one single stitch or a decrease stitch and then I'll be able to take it across. I think a decrease stitch there and then we'll go over the top. This is very much a project of have a play, see what works. Some things don't, unfortunately, but other things are a great success. So you have to be prepared to unpick things occasionally, not very often, but occasionally. Right, I think that's about right. Let's have a look. We've got 2, 4, 6, 8 seed beads underneath there, but let's see how close I am. Yeah, I think 8 seed beads and through the crystal. So let's put on 8 seed beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's 8 seed beads. Now this is going to make the arch across the top. So I'm going to go through the crystal bead. There we go. And I'm going to go through. Now if I go through all 8, that's going to really pinch that space there. So instead I'm going to go through 7. That leaves that 8th bead just bridging that gap. Let's pull it nice and firm. Yes, that's worked. So you can see that was the first of the 8 beads. So I went over the top through the crystal. That's the first of the 8 beads. I skipped past that one and just came back through that 7. And now I need to bring everything together. Now if I put on one bead to pair up with this one here, and then 1 bead to square stitch to that one there, that should work. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see better. So if I put 1 bead on to pair up with this one and then I square stitch 1 to this one, we should get a nice coming together of the rows. So that's the 1 to pair up with this one, and then I need 1 for a square stitch. To go with that one. So I'm going to skip a bead and square stitch to this one, and I'm square stitching the second bead I've just put on. Let's put it up tight. And that's worked. You see we've got that nice ellipse shape coming off the end. Right, I need to flip these other ones as well. I'm going to do the same again, so I'm going to come round this curve over the top of this bead and around this curve and over the top of this bead off to the end, and then I'll be back to you. So I've finished this first row. So I've got the mustard going all the way along the top, and the grey goes along the top as well up till here where it swaps to underneath. So we've got double seed beads above this bead, but we've only got a single row of seed beads above and a single row of seed beads below this one, and this gives a variety along the length. Now, contrary to my expectations, I'm actually a little bit long on my finished length on the first row, so I'm going to take off the keeper bead, there we go, off with the keeper bead, and I've only square stitched to the end of my length with the mustard coloured beads, so I can take off those last few grey ones. So that's going to be pretty much my finished length. Now I want to neaten these two rows before I move on, so I'm going to put my needle onto the grey thread end, and I'm going to use this to neaten the mustard coloured row. So I'm just going to come back through the beads of the mustard coloured row, and it will just bring everything neatly into line. It's really important you don't pull too tightly, because you've set up the row to work with the bead counts you've got, and if you tighten it up you'll find you've got bits where it buckles. What we're doing is just smoothing out the corners I pop that down. You can probably see the difference between the bit I've done and the bit I'm yet to do. Now when I've done this with the mustard row, I'll attach my needle to the thread that's on the end, at the end of the mustard row, the one that's just been doing the square stitch down the mustard row, and I will do the same down the grey row, and that will just make sure everything is nice and neat. And you can see it's coming together quite neatly. So when I've done that, I'll be back to you to show you how to start the next row. So I've neatened the two rows and everything's much smoother and tidier. I'm now going to start a third row, and I'm going to do it in this sort of oily purple. Now I've created two little arches here that will take those two beads, so I'm going to come along here with my purple thread and incorporate those, and I might make another space there for a bead, and we'll see how it goes. But now I've got most of the beads on that I want to use, I can plan more carefully for the extra accent beads that are just going to lift this out of the ordinary. So I think that purple one might go on into that curve there when I do that side of the row, and I'll do that after I've done the purple row. And you see that might slot in there nicely. And I've got a gold seed bead that might go in here, and that's on this row coming this way. So I've got lots of options. I'm not going to set anything in stone straight away, but I'll see how it develops. But I start the row in exactly the same way as I started the previous row, although I don't need to necessarily start at the same end. This time I'm going to start at this end so I can remember to put those two beads in, because I've done this before and forgotten to put the beads in. So let's start. We're going to go to this side of the grey row, so just the same as before, new piece of single thread. I'm going to pass up to the end of the row, so I come out of the end of the previous row, or the row that's supporting this one, and do a square stitch. And that turns the direction of the needle. So I'm now coming back along. So it's up through the first one, on the previous row, and down through the new one. And you just have to be careful on that first stitch that you don't catch the thread around the end bead. And we're away. So I'm going to come along here. I'll need to do a decrease stitch here to take these two beads into one. I'll probably have to do an increase stitch on the top here, and then I'll either, I think that bead will go straight against the grey, so I'll bring a stitch around here, just the same as we did on the previous row. And then along here I might actually follow the purple around on the inside, and that might go in on the next row. I'm not sure yet, we'll see how it goes. I'll be back to you with the next stage. Now this is one I started previously to show you the next row already attached. So that's the purple row I've just started, and you can see it swaps from this side, and I brought it down through these beads to bring it down to this side, because that's just the way it worked better with the curves of the undulations. However, I could have taken it along the top, but actually swapping it from one side to the other makes it a bit more interesting, I think. Now I've also put on my outside row along that edge of the design. Now the outside row is made with size 8s, and I haven't actually added any feature beads along this. I've just gone along, followed the curves of the outside of the row on that edge, which is partly purple, partly mustard, just to neaten everything off. You don't want beads sticking out too far, the larger beads sticking out too far, because they tend to catch. Now I could put another row of size 10s along here, or size 10s or size 11s. I've got this nice olive colour I could introduce, but actually I'm quite happy with that as it is. And I've got another size 8 bead to come along this edge to finish off this edge. So that's what I'm going to do next. Just going to start my row just the same as I've done before. So it's towards the end of the row. Leave a little tail to sew in a bit, and then I'm going to start with one size 8 seed bead joining onto a size 10 seed bead with a square stitch. There we go, and that started the row. Now obviously size 8s are bigger than size 10, so I don't need to marry up every size 10 with a size 8, and that's what helps to bring everything together. So let's do one more single stitch. Sorry, that's my thread catching around my scissors. As I've said previously, try to work on a tidy desk, not a desk like mine. And you can see now that I haven't got very much space there to fit in 2 size 8s, partly because there's a curve and partly because the 8s are bigger than the 10s. So I'm going to do a decrease stitch. So I'm going to go back through 2 and forward through 1. So I'm doing exactly the same as I've done before, but I might have to do a few more decrease stitches, a few more increase stitches to make the size 8s marry up neatly with the edge of the size 10s, as you can see. It's quite a pleasant job to do. Now incidentally, I have neatened each row as I've gone along, so I've taken the thread end from the previous row and I've passed back through the new row, and that's why this feels quite firm. Now although that's an outside curve, I haven't had to put an increase stitch on because I'm using a larger bead. So don't automatically assume because you're going around the outside of a curve you have to put an increase stitch in. Now this is an interesting thing. I've got a double hole bead here. Now these types of designs are great for using double hole beads up, and I want to go through this outside hole this time. So let's have a look to see if that works. Now you see I need another bead on as well. Let's put on 2 beads. Make sure I don't pick up a bead that's too fat. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, that works, but it leaves a space there, so let's come back through the other hole and see what we can do with this space. Now I'm going to pick up the seed beads that I've used on the other end. That works quite well. So I'm just going to pop it into the space. I can make little adjustments as I go along. See, that fills that little gap quite nicely. I didn't know I was going to do that, but that's the beauty of this. You just go with the flow. And now I need to come back down to here, so I'm going to probably need to put on 3 seed beads, 3 of the size 8s, and come down to this 3rd bead here. Let's see if that works. Yes, it does, but I'm going to have to put a decrease stitch here to get around that little crease. Now I've got a little hole there, and I can come back when I strengthen this row. I can pop another little bead in there if I want to. So I'm going to continue down this edge, and I'll be back to you when I've finished. Here we are. We have the final row put in all the way along, and it's made everything feel much firmer, much more stable. I'm pleased to say that it's the right length, and the two ends have ended up almost parallel, which is good enough to use a sliding clasp. Now a 2-row is just the right size, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish off all the ends, but as I finish them off, I'm going to stab stitch down through the beadwork and through the holes on the clasp so that I can attach one side to this end and one side to that end, and I'll be back to show you the finished bracelet. So now there's the clasp attached. The loops are actually concealed. I've stab stitched onto them so that the beadwork comes directly up to the barrel of the clasp, and the bracelet is complete. I'm actually quite pleased with it. There are a few mistakes, things I would change if I was using exactly the same set of beads again, but of course I won't because these are oddments. But you can see there's a slight curve on it, and I think I need an extra bead, an extra size 8 on this edge here because it's pulling, and I think I've got one too many just here where it's a little bit pointed. But otherwise I'm rather pleased with it. For a group of beads that were just sitting at the back of the drawer, I've made them into something really nice that I will wear, and I've even used a slightly damaged clasp which works perfectly well, but I wouldn't have used it on a normal finished item because I think the damage would be too much then, but actually on this it sort of suits the style of the design. I hope you'll give it a go. I will go away and finish this version as well, and I'll post it on Facebook when it's done. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.